Hello viewers, today we will discuss about the labor force trends in the United States. The labor force is defined simply as the people who are willing and able to work. The 13th International Conference of Labor Statisticians held in 1982 recommended two measures of economically active population. The usually active population measured in relation to a long reference period such as a year, and the currently active population measured in relation to a short reference period such as a week or one day. The currently active population is also referred to as the labor force. The population not currently active comprises all persons not employed or unemployed during the brief reference period and hence not currently active. It is equivalent to the concept of persons not in the labor force. The figure 1 depicts the concept of labor force. Employed and unemployed together make up labor force. The remainder is counted as not in the labor force. Labor market in the United States. In order to evaluate labor market conditions, economists often focus on three important statistics: labor force participation rate, unemployment rate, the employment population ratio. The equation 1 simply shows that labor force is sum of employed and unemployed population. Equation 2 shows the labor force participation rate. It is the total civilian labor force divided by the total number in the civilian non-institutionalized population, and this ratio is then multiplied by 100 and expressed as a percentage. Equation 3 shows the rate of unemployment, which is the number of persons unemployed as a percentage of the labor force. Equation 4 shows the employment population ratio. It is ratio of the number of people employed to population 16 years and over, expressed as a percentage. The figure 2 depicts the changes in the labor force participation rate. The curve shows gradual movement upwards after 1968, and till 1990 the rate increased. Thereafter, it stabilized and started to decline after 2007. The labor market conditions in the United States can be explained in terms of certain major trends. The economy is creating jobs, but too many Americans remain without work. In June 2013, almost 1,95,000 new jobs were added to the economy. Due to increasing size of the labor force, job growth has not been sufficient to reduce unemployment. The labor force participation rate was 63.5% in June 2013, and employment population ratio stood at 58.7%. While private sector continues to generate employment, government at both the federal and state levels is shedding jobs. From May to June 2013, federal government employment declined by 5,000 jobs, while state government employment declined more sharply by 15,000 jobs. The vast majority of job creation is occurring within the services industries rather than in the production of goods. Within the services sector, most of the job gains have been in leisure and hospitality, professional and business services, retail trade, healthcare and financial activities. Work hours remained stable while real wages declined in June 2013 for production workers. The average work week for all employees stood at 34.5 hours and remained unchanged over the month of June 2013. Unemployment rate conceals the labor underutilization in USA's economy. Unemployment rate remained constant at 7.6% from May to June 2013. However, the official unemployment rate systematically underestimated the job deficits by excluding certain category of workers such as marginally attached workers. Unemployment is a greater challenge within specific demographic groups. Ethno-racial minorities and young workers are groups facing unemployment more severely than others. Overall job recovery prospects. United States has witnessed moderate yet uneven job creation over past 3 years since the Great Recession. The employment population ratio declined during recession from 62.7% in December 2007 to 59.4% in June 2009 and began to recover in December 2009. On the other hand, the unemployment rate declined by 2.3% over the same period. The figure 3 shows the changes in youth unemployment rate in the United States. It increased to 11.20% in November from 11.10% in October of 2015. Factors determining labor force. There can be a number of factors that directly and indirectly influence the size, composition and growth of labor force, such as population, income, educational attainment and home ownership. Population increases result in labor force increases. Similarly, an increase in a state's income attracts labor force entrants hoping to take advantage. A more educated society has a larger labor force. However, a higher home ownership rate is associated with a slightly smaller labor force due to reduced employee mobility. The history of USA's labor force is a story of dramatic change. The rippling effects of the massive demographic changes that occurred within the USA's population during the 20th century will create further changes in coming times. Many factors have played a role in affecting these trends in the past 50 or more years. The different birth patterns. A number of distinct birth patterns evolved in the population of the United States in the last century that led to similar labor force patterns as various cohorts reached 16 years of age and joined the workforce. The birth dearth led to decrease of 1 million people in the 25 to 34 age group during 1950 to 60 period and also a corresponding drop of around 9 lakh people in 35 to 44 age group in the 1960 to 70 period. The baby boom can be traced to the increase of nearly 9.4 million people in the 16 to 24 age group during the 1960 to 70 period and 7.3 million in the 1970 to 80 period. The baby bust is reflected by the decrease of nearly 3.8 million in the 16 to 24 age group during 1980 to 90 period. The same impact was seen in succeeding decades in older age groups. The baby boom echo or baby boomlet can be seen in the increase of more than 1 million people in the 16 to 24 age group during 1990 to 2000 period. Rapid growth of the participation rates of women. In the 2 decades after the World War II, the USA's economy enjoyed a major expansion coupled with increases in productivity, higher standards of living and rapid acceleration in growth of college enrollments. Rapid economic growth vastly increased the demand for labor. The civil rights movement, legislation promoting equal opportunity in employment, and the women's rights movement created an atmosphere that was hospitable to more women working outside the home. The combination of all these factors created strong inducements for women to join the workforce, significantly affecting their participation rate. Such changes were also accompanied by many other social, economic, and demographic changes in the status of women. In 1950, the overall participation rate of women was 34%. The rate rose to 38% in 1960, 43% in 1970, 52% in 1980, and 60% by 2000. Between 1970 and 1980, the labor force participation rates of women in 25 to 34 and 35 to 44 age groups increased by 20.5 percentage points and 14.5 percentage points respectively. During the same period, the participation rate of women in the 16 to 24 age group increased by 10.6 percentage points. Diversity. During the last 50 years of the 20th century, the USA's population grew more and more racially and ethnically diverse. The greater diversity of population resulted in an increased diversity in the labor force. Immigration has been the major source of growing diversity. Many immigrants come to the United States seeking better job opportunities and higher wages. They tend to be in the younger age groups with higher labor force participation rates. From the early 1970s to 2000, the Hispanic share of total population increased by more than 7 percentage points to 11.3%. It is therefore not surprising that the aggregate USA's labor force participation rate rose in decades prior to 2000. Labor force trends in USA. Labor force growth. The historical growth of the USA's labor force in the last 4 decades is linked to the two main factors: growth in population size and increase in women labor force participation rates. In the 1960s, the USA's labor force increased by 1.7% annually as baby boomers started to enter the workforce. Labor force growth accelerated during the 1970s as more baby boomers reached adulthood. At the same time, women started to enter labor force in great numbers. As a result of both these trends, the labor force grew at a fast rate of 2.6% each year. By the 1980s and 1990s, most of the baby boomers had already entered the workforce, and a smaller cohort of workers followed. Labor force growth slowed to 1.6% during the 1980s and to 1.1% during the 1990s. Over the next 50 years, the labor force is projected to grow even more slowly at about 0.6% per year as baby boomers retire. As a result, there are mounting concerns about the future growth of USA's economy. The Table 1 shows the percentage increment in labor force in USA. During 1950 to 1960, labor force grew by 1.10%, which increased in following years but again stabilized at 1.10% in 1990 to 2010. Female labor force participation. Since 1970, the proportion of all women in labor force has increased from 43% to nearly 60%, while the proportion of men decreased slightly from 80% to 73% in 2007. This convergence between men and women's labor force participation rates represents the tail end of a trend that began at least 100 years ago. In 1990, only 19% of women of working age were working or looking for work. In 2007, women represented 46% of the people in the labor force. Some of the decline in men's labor force participation rates can be explained by increasing income of people over age 50 made possible through the social security benefits. Decline in men's labor force participation also has been observed at younger ages, particularly among the less educated. However, the factors affecting the rise in women's employment are more complex. The participation rates among women leveled up since 1990. A plausible explanation for this could have been a rapid increase in economic growth during the 1990s that raised the men's income to the point that some married women opted out of labor force. There has been stagnation in women's labor force participation rates since 2000 because of slowing economy or individual attitudes amongst women who prefer household chores to work. Labor force participation rate for women with young children or no children or adult children still lags behind that of women with children aged 6 to 17 for whom the rate was 77% in 2005. The table 2 shows the changes in labor force participation rates for women in different age groups from 1989 to 2005. The table 3 depicts the labor force participation rates for women of different ethnicity. In the year 2000, women belonging to black ethnicity had shown highest rate, and the same pattern was reflected in 2005. Baby boomers retire. The USA's workforce will grow older as the baby boomers grow older. The median age in 2007 was estimated to be 41 years, and by 2030, 23% of total labor force is going to be aged 55 years and older, compared with 13% in 2000. Most of the concerns about baby boomers relate to their retirement and ability of workforce to support them as they grow older. It is expected that with improvements in health and longevity in the United States, people might be expected to stay in the workforce longer and retire later. The table 4 shows the median age of labor force, which as a whole increased from 34.6 years in 1980 to 41.7 years in 2010. For women, the rise was more pronounced than men. In other categories also, median age has ultimately increased. Racial and ethnic diversity. In 2005, the majority of people in the workforce were non-Hispanic white. But the racial and ethnic composition of the workforce will change dramatically by 2050. By 2050, the Hispanic population is projected to reach 24% of the labor force in 2050, up from 5% in 2005. In contrast, the African American share of labor force will only grow from 11% to 14% in 2050. Because other groups are growing faster, the non-Hispanic white share of labor force is projected to drop to just over 50% in 2050. Across racial and ethnic groups, Hispanic men aged between 20 and 64 had the highest labor force participation rate in 2005 at around 87%. Hispanic women, however, had the lowest rate of 64%. The table 5 depicts the labor force trends for youth ages 16 to 24 across 3 years, 2000, 2007 and 2011. The labor force participation rate as a whole declined to 55% in 2011. It also declined for other groups. The rate still remained higher for males than females in 2011. The Table 6 provides details about the labor force participation rate, employment population ratio, and unemployment ratio for different age groups in 2011. The labor force participation rate was highest for population lying between 25 to 54 years, that is 81%, and so was the employment population ratio, that is 75.1%. The unemployment ratio was highest for the group 16 to 24 years. The Table 7 depicts the labor force participation rate for men of different ethnicity. Unemployment and displaced workers. As the demand for low-skilled labor declined in 1970s and 1980s, the share of men classified as non-employed, that is, those who are unemployed or out of the labor force, increased. The share of prime working age men not participating in the labor force continued to rise in the 1990s, largely because the number of non-employed, particularly ill and disabled, increased. A long-term pattern of declining employment among males aged 55 to 64 ceased in the 1990s. The Table 8 shows how the employment has been changing between 2005 and 2014. 62.7% of labor force was employed in 2005 and 5.1% was unemployed. In 2014, this percentage was 59 and 6.2 respectively. The Table 9 depicts the various categories of people not in the labor force. The largest category was constituted by those who did not want a job, and the smallest was contributed by ill health and disability. Occupational shifts in the labor force. The number of workers in professional and technical and related occupation increased more than fourfold from 1910 until 2000. Nationwide, there were 7.5 million scientists and engineers, including social scientists and technicians in United States in 2006, representing 5% of the total labor force. Regional fortunes. From 1970 to 2006, higher rates of job growth have been concentrated in the western and northwestern regions of USA and selected parts of the South. Employment growth in the Midwest and Northeast has been more sluggish. In the 1970s, USA's jobs grew at an annual rate of 2.2%, and most states in western half of the USA had job growth of 2.8% or more. However, in 1980s, there has been a slowdown in job growth in some parts. The 1990s emerged as a period of recession and housing bust. Most of the country has experienced annual rates of job growth well below 2%. The Table 10 depicts the percentage changes in labor force according to age, gender, and race. The percentage change was pronounced in age group of 55 plus in 2000-2010 and also for the category of Asian. For Hispanic group, the change was more pronounced in 1990 to 2000. Conclusion. Many policymakers and business leaders are concerned that as baby boomers retire, labor productivity will drop as more experienced workers are replaced by people with fewer years on the job. There has been a momentous change in the size, composition and characteristics of USA's labor force. The same social, demographic and economic forces that influenced the level, growth and composition of labor force during the past will continue to influence the workforce in coming decades. Thank you. We will meet again with another interesting topic. Till then, goodbye.